Day 714. We nearly lost Kyle, but managed to gain some Lombardi trophies. After the craziness of last week, I was determined to get us to Pittsburgh, come hell or high water. I meant both things figuratively, but of course, the universe has a way of making me pay for my transgressions. I finished the drive through Indiana faster than anyone thought possible, most likely because I wanted to put as much ground between us and Chicago as I could. I would have just driven straight through Ohio, but Lisa insisted we stop at Cedar Point. She wasn't the only one excited for a day of fun, though. Kyle and Steven were bouncing off the walls at the prospect of roller coasters. I didn't even know if I would be able to get the rides running, but I wouldn't need to worry about that as the park was in full operation when we arrived. We, and by we I mean mostly Kyle and Steven, rode every ride in the park at least once. Lisa and I were worn out by lunchtime, so we were mostly just watching the kids as they rode through the afternoon and into the evening. The park itself was almost eerie with no one else around, and I found myself looking over my shoulder as we moved from ride to ride. Lisa picked up on this more than the other two and called me out on it as Kyle and Steven rode the Millennium Force. "Relax, Charlie. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," she said. "I'm trying to. It just feels like we're being watched out here in the open like this." I couldn't help but look over my shoulder again, knowing what was coming next. "Don't let what Steven said get to you. He has an overactive imagination. He probably saw a cardboard cutout or something and thought it was a person." "Oh yeah, because as we know, inanimate objects don't just come to life or anything," I scoffed, immediately regretting my choice of words. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing and saying everything I could think of to apologize to her. As we made our way out of the park, carrying Kyle and pushing Steven in a stroller, she finally forgave me on the condition I would stop letting the idea of a random guy following us ruin things. I agreed in principle and have been focusing on forgetting about it ever since. We spent the night in the parking lot before making our way further across Ohio the next day. I never really realized how big that state was, or maybe I was just tired from spending so many hours behind the wheel in recent weeks. We made another stop in the Buckeye State at the Cuyahoga Valley National Park as we continued east. This was a stop I was really looking forward to as it included a visit to the Brandywine Falls. Waterfalls have always been my favorite natural features, and the Brandywine Falls may have taken the top spot on my list this week. The whole area was beautiful, and we stopped at the perfect time of day. It wasn't too hot or too cold, and the sun hit the water just right. I swear I even saw a tear in Steven's eye, or maybe it was just some of the spray from the falls condensing on his wooden face. After a short hike, we made a small campfire near the RV and cooked some dinner, following hot dogs up with s'mores in the camping tradition. A couple of songs and ghost stories capped off what had been a much more enjoyable day than I anticipated. The next morning, we drove down to Canton to visit the Pro Football Hall of Fame as Lisa wanted to check out any Steelers players they had there. It was mostly busts of famous players with some other interesting exhibits, but there were one or two life-size statues that I'm pretty sure Lisa was ogling. I tried not to get jealous, especially since they are just statues, but I couldn't help but notice how much bigger their arms were than mine. After that brief stop, we carried on out of Ohio and into Pennsylvania. We decided to camp again for the night, stopping at the Raccoon Creek State Park. This time we had steaks over the fire and took the singing to a whole new level. Stephen got so carried away that he nearly fell into the fire, and it was only my cat-like reflexes that saved him. The incident basically brought the night to an end, and we all made our way to bed. As I was drifting off to sleep, I thought I heard voices outside the RV. Peeking out the window, I didn't see anything at first, but I did catch what appeared to be a very quick flash of light before silence took over again. I assumed it was my imagination, though if I didn't know any better, I would have thought it was a search party looking for someone. The rest of the night was quiet as far as I know. I fell asleep shortly after that incident and awoke a few hours later to warm sunshine streaming on my face. After a hearty breakfast of bacon and eggs, we left the campsite and made our way into Pittsburgh. The plan was to stop at the factory where Lisa's mom was and let the two of them reconnect. But that was quickly thwarted when we arrived at the empty lot where the factory once stood. Lisa, I'm so sorry, I said, putting my arm around her shoulder. It's okay. She probably wouldn't have remembered me anyway. I was the 13,165th mannequin to come out of her, and I'm sure there were tens of thousands more, she said. Even if she didn't want to admit it, I could tell she was feeling down, and I wanted more than anything to cheer her back up. My first thought was to take her to the zoo, but that didn't really work out as planned since, there were no animals. We were able to get snow cones, but she dropped hers on the path and didn't want to go back for another one. I contemplated several ideas that evening as she slept, but nothing stuck out until Stephen chimed in. Isn't Lisa's favorite football team from here? Stephen, you're a genius. A pine fresh wooden genius, I nearly yelled. It took you long enough to figure it out, he said, a little bit of pride showing in his hollow eyes. The next morning, I drove the RV over to Acrisure Stadium, the home of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Lisa was surprised at the impromptu visit, but even more surprised when I told her why we were there. We're going to get some amazing souvenirs. I remember reading somewhere that they keep the 6 Lombardi trophies in here, as well as jerseys worn by the players over the years and balls used in games. We'll be so decked out in Steelers stuff that you won't know what to do. I smiled as I finished, not sure what response I would get. Oh, Charlie, this is the best present. Let's take it all, she said, more enthusiasm than I expected for what was more or less grand larceny. Climbing out of the motorhome, we made our way inside the main entrance to what they called the Hall of Honor Museum. It was by far the most exclusive place that I've been so far, and I was waiting for cops to come out around every corner. At the same time, it was thrilling to be able to go into places that no one else in my own world would have had the privilege to visit. As we moved, we stacked things in the wagon I'd brought with us from Chicago and read through the history of the building and the team. The Lombardi trophies were on display in a large room that highlighted all the Super Bowl wins the Steelers had accumulated, and I had a hard time getting Lisa to leave after we grabbed the trophies. Making our way deeper into the facility, we found a hallway that apparently led to the locker rooms and team areas, and Lisa was giggling like a schoolgirl as we started making our way in that direction. It was at that point that I realized our group was short one member. Where's Kyle? I asked, looking up and down the hall. I think he said he had to use the bathroom and to go on without him, Stephen said, a slight twinge in his voice. Stephen, where is Kyle? At that point, I was starting to panic. I convinced him to go in that room back there with the fire symbol on the door, Stephen replied, looking down at the ground. Running back down the hallway, I found the door Stephen was talking about. It was the entrance to the boiler room. Rushing through the door, I started calling out for Kyle, moving between the water tanks and looking high and low. I was starting to think Stephen had lied to me when I spotted Kyle's tail peeking out from behind a large panel. Running over, I found him pinned under a large metal bar. At the time, it didn't really seem that significant, and I threw it aside as I pulled my favorite stegosaurus out of harm's way. I was about to start scolding him for running off when I noticed the panel he had been hiding behind lighting up like a Christmas tree. The whole place was about to explode, and we only had a small amount of time to get out. Emerging back into the hallway, with Kyle in my arms, I grabbed the cart, Lisa and Stephen, and bolted for the nearest exit. Automated alarms started sounding through the stadium as we made our way outside. Running around the corner, we nearly collided with the RV, and I loaded everyone and the gear as fast as I could before leaving the area. We were about 3 blocks away when a massive explosion rocked the stadium and buildings around us. I was worried the whole area was going to be engulfed, but thankfully it was just the stadium and a couple of nearby buildings. Bringing the RV to a stop, I took a moment to collect my thoughts before turning around to see a terrified Stephen looking back at me. Kyle was yipping like a dog again, just happy to be alive, and Lisa was stone silent with shock. I went through a range of emotions all in a matter of seconds, but I couldn't find it in me to be mad. Hell, I was almost impressed. Of all the crazy things we've been through, I never imagined Stephen would find a way to not only nearly kill us all, but also demolish at least some of an NFL stadium. Mind you, it wasn't Stephen directly, but he knew what he was doing when he encouraged Kyle to look in that room. After making sure everyone was okay and snapping Lisa out of her daze, I got the RV back on the road and out of town. I briefly thought I heard emergency vehicles heading to the stadium, but I brushed it off as just my mind playing tricks on me after such an insane incident. Stephen apologized profusely, and I let him off with a warning, mostly because the whole situation seemed so outrageous. I haven't told anyone yet, but I've been thinking about visiting Washington, D.C. while we're on this side of the country. After what happened today, though, I'm not sure if that's such a good idea. On the other hand, how could Stephen possibly top destroying a stadium?